The moment you clicked this, your breakthrough phase was already activated. Not because of the video itself, not because of information you are about to hear, but because the click was a response. A recognition. A movement that happened before thought, before justification, before effort. This is not chance. This is resonance expressing itself through action. You did not find this message. You aligned with it. From the perspective of the mind, a click looks small and insignificant. From the perspective of consciousness, it is a signal. It is a selection. It is the moment a frequency confirms itself by moving toward its own reflection. That is why nothing needs to be forced here. The breakthrough phase is not something that starts later. It is already activated by recognition alone. Most people believe change begins with effort. With doing more. With pushing against what is. But reality does not respond to force. It responds to coherence. And coherence is revealed, not manufactured. The fact that you are here means a certain internal alignment had already stabilized enough to register this signal. This is not about becoming ready. Readiness has already occurred. A breakthrough is not a reward for struggle. It is a natural consequence of identity reaching a tipping point. When who you are being can no longer sustain the old pattern, reality reorganizes to match the new signal. That reorganization does not begin with visible results. It begins with recognition. With a quiet internal click that says, without words, this is relevant. That is what just happened. You are not a small person trying to influence an external world. You are consciousness observing itself through form, responding to its own state. When consciousness recognizes coherence, it moves toward it effortlessly. That movement is what you call choice. That movement is what you just enacted. This is why there is nothing accidental about timing. The field does not misfire. Notice how there is no strain required to be here. No convincing. No pushing past resistance. That ease is the signal. Ease is alignment. Ease is the indicator that the current you are in is already carrying you forward. When effort drops, flow takes over. When control loosens, responsiveness increases. This is the law. The breakthrough phase is not loud. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It begins quietly, with an internal shift in orientation. A subtle but irreversible change in how reality is perceived. From this point forward, things will not move because you chase them. They will move because your state allows them to. That distinction changes everything. You do not need to decide if this is true. You only need to notice that you are already here. That is enough. Recognition is the mechanism. Presence is the doorway. And this moment is the activation point. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and rem. I'm within it. A breakthrough is rarely what the mind imagines it to be. It is not a single moment where everything changes at once. It is not a dramatic pivot or a sudden external reward. A breakthrough is a phase. A sustained energetic state where reality begins to reorganize itself around a new internal coherence. When this is understood, impatience dissolves and trust replaces strain. The mind looks for events because events feel measurable. They give the illusion of control. But reality does not operate in isolated moments. It moves through continuity. Through phases that build, stabilize, and mature. When a breakthrough begins, it does not announce itself with instant results. It begins with a subtle shift in how you are positioned within yourself. From there, the field responds gradually, intelligently, and precisely. This is why so many people miss their own breakthroughs. They are watching for fireworks while the foundation is being laid. They expect proof before stability. But stability is what creates proof. The phase must be allowed to root before it can express. When you understand this, you stop interrupting the process by constantly checking for outcomes. A phase is not passive. It is active beneath the surface. Think of it as a recalibration rather than a reward. Old structures loosen. Patterns lose their grip. Emotional reactions soften. The urgency to force movement fades. These are not signs that nothing is happening. They are signs that something deeper is aligning. Reality is adjusting to a new signal, and that adjustment happens layer by layer. Instant results belong to unstable states. They spike and collapse. Phases build durability. They integrate. They create consistency. This is why a true breakthrough does not feel explosive for long. It feels steady. It feels calm. It feels normal faster than expected. That normality is not failure. It is evidence that the new state is becoming livable. When expectations of immediacy dissolve, resistance dissolves with them. You stop testing the field. You stop asking if it's working. You stop leaning forward energetically. And in that release, movement accelerates. Not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped interfering. Allowing is not waiting. Allowing is maintaining coherence without grasping. A breakthrough phase asks for one thing above all else: stabilization. Not excitement. Not intensity. Stability. The ability to remain present without needing reassurance. The ability to hold a frequency without dramatizing it. This is where most shifts either lock in or dissolve. Not at the beginning, but during the quiet middle where nothing obvious seems to be happening. Reality reorganizes in response to who you are being consistently, not what you demand occasionally. A phase gives reality time to match you across multiple dimensions. Relationships, opportunities, perceptions, and timing all need space to reconfigure. When you respect that intelligence, you stop rushing what is already unfolding. This is the difference between a moment and a phase. A moment passes. A phase transforms. And once a phase has begun, it does not require effort to continue. It requires recognition and steadiness. You are not waiting for the breakthrough to happen. You are already in learning how to remain. This activation happens now because now is when readiness converges. Not when conditions look perfect, not when life becomes quiet, not when the mind finally feels certain. It happens now because the internal signal has reached coherence. Timing is not decided by clocks or circumstances. It is decided by vibration. And vibration moves when it is complete, not when it is convenient. Every experience you have moved through has been accumulating information. Contrast was not random. It was refining. Each moment of frustration clarified preference. Each moment of limitation sharpened awareness. Each repetition that no longer satisfied you was compressing energy toward a new alignment. Contrast does not delay activation. It prepares it. Without contrast, clarity cannot stabilize. Readiness is not about feeling good all the time. It is about being clear. Clear about what no longer resonates. Clear about the emotional cost of staying the same. Clear enough that the old frequency cannot be convincingly inhabited anymore. When that clarity locks in, reality has no choice but to respond. That response is what you experience as timing. Now is not a coincidence. Now is the only point where enough alignment exists to support movement without collapse. If this activation had occurred earlier, it would not have held. The nervous system would have resisted. Identity would have fragmented. The field would have responded inconsistently. Delay was not punishment. Delay was stabilization. The mind often interprets now as arbitrary. But from the perspective of the field, now is precise. It is the exact moment when resistance drops below a threshold and allowing becomes possible. It is when effort gives way to recognition. When forcing no longer feels viable. When the question quietly shifts from how do I make this happen to why would I resist what is already forming. Alignment is not something you chase. It is something that reveals itself when competing signals fall away. Over time, distractions lose their pull. Old desires lose their urgency. External validation loses its power. These are not losses. They are signs of consolidation. Energy that was scattered is returning to center. When enough energy coheres, activation occurs. This is why your breakthrough phase could not be triggered by motivation alone. Motivation spikes and fades. What activates phases is exhaustion with misalignment. A calm refusal to continue broadcasting a signal that no longer matches you. That refusal does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to be complete. When it is, the field reorganizes naturally. Nothing about this moment is premature. And nothing about it is late. It is exact. Exact to the degree that you can now remain present without grasping. Exact to the degree that recognition feels quieter than striving ever did. Exact to the degree that you are no longer trying to convince yourself of anything. When readiness accumulates, it does not announce itself loudly. It arrives as inevitability. As a sense that something has already turned, even if you cannot yet name it. That sense is trustworthy. It is the internal confirmation that the conditions are no longer being negotiated. Now is not asking for belief. Now is asking for allowance. Because what is activating does not need permission from the mind. It only needs space to continue. And that space is created by understanding that this moment is not random. It is the convergence point. The only moment this PhASE could begin. Emotion is the primary interface between consciousness and reality. Not thought. Not intention. Not action. Emotion. Before the mind interprets, before words form, emotion is already communicating with the field. It is the first response, the most honest signal, and the fastest translator between inner state and external experience. If you understand emotion, you understand how reality listens. Emotion is not something to be fixed or managed. It is information. It is frequency in motion. Every emotional state broadcasts instructions, not through intensity, but through consistency. What you feel habitually becomes the tone the field responds to. This is why recognition matters more than suppression. When emotion is recognized without resistance, it naturally reorganizes. When it is ignored or forced away, it distorts the signal. Expansion and contraction are the two primary emotional indicators. Expansion feels like ease, openness, calm clarity, or quiet confidence. Contraction feels like tightness, urgency, frustration, or pressure. These are not moral categories. They are directional signals. Expansion indicates alignment with your current identity. Contraction indicates misalignment. Neither is wrong. Both are guidance. Most people misinterpret contraction as failure. They try to escape it, override it, or push through it. But contraction is simply feedback. It is the system saying this frequency is no longer sustainable. When listened to, contraction refines direction. When resisted, it amplifies. The field does not punish contraction. It reflects how you respond to it. Emotion becomes a gate when it is allowed to be felt without narrative. Without justification. Without identity attachment. In that allowance, emotion completes its cycle. Frequency stabilizes. The signal cleans itself. This is why forcing positivity delays alignment. It introduces incoherence. The field responds to what is true, not to what is performed. Expansion does not require excitement. It often feels neutral. Calm. Ordinary. That ordinariness is power. It means the nervous system is not fighting the signal. It means the frequency can be sustained. This is where breakthroughs stabilize. Not in emotional highs, but in emotional clarity. When you begin to trust emotional guidance, decision-making simplifies. You stop asking what should I do and start noticing what feels coherent now. That coherence is not dramatic. It is subtle. But it is precise. Reality organizes itself around that precision without needing instructions. Emotion does not create through force. It creates through consistency. A calm, stable emotional state carries more directive power than intense desire followed by doubt. The field responds to what you remain in, not what you spike into occasionally. This is why recognition matters more than effort. Recognition allows emotion to inform without distortion. As this lands, notice what expands as you listen. Notice what softens when you stop arguing with your emotional state. That softening is not weakness. It is alignment. It is the gate opening naturally. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Forcing is the mind's attempt to compensate for mistrust. It arises when alignment is doubted and control is mistaken for power. From the outside, forcing can look like discipline, ambition, or persistence. From the perspective of the field, it is resistance. It is a signal that says something is missing, and that signal fragments coherence. Reality does not respond to effort the way the mind assumes it does. Effort belongs to physical systems. Creation belongs to energetic ones. When effort is applied without alignment, it creates friction. Friction slows movement. It introduces delays, contradictions, and unnecessary complexity. This is why pushing harder so often produces diminishing returns. Control feels productive because it creates activity. But activity is not the same as movement. True movement happens when the field recognizes a stable signal and reorganizes around it. Control disrupts that stability by constantly shifting the signal. One moment you are certain. The next, you are checking. One moment you are allowing. The next, you are correcting. The field receives mixed instructions. Forcing is not about action itself. Action taken from coherence is clean and efficient. Forcing is action taken to escape discomfort. To override contraction instead of listening to it. To hurry outcomes instead of stabilizing frequency. When action is used to silence emotion rather than follow it, resistance is amplified. Allowing is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not waiting. It is not disengagement. Allowing is the decision to stop interfering with what is already unfolding. It is remaining present without leaning forward energetically. It is letting emotion inform without trying to manage it. In allowing, the signal becomes steady. And steadiness is what the field can respond to. Calm receptivity is not weak. It is precise. It sends a clear instruction: nothing needs to be chased, nothing needs to be defended. In that clarity, pathways open naturally. Timing synchronizes. Responses appear without effort. This is not because you gave up. It is because you stopped broadcasting urgency. Urgency is the signature of forcing. It compresses attention into the future. It pulls awareness out of the present moment where creation actually happens. When urgency drops, presence returns. And with presence comes influence. Not through control, but through resonance. Every breakthrough phase tests this distinction. Not by removing challenges, but by removing the illusion that struggle is necessary. The impulse to force will arise. That impulse is not failure. It is feedback. It is an invitation to soften, to recalibrate, to return to coherence. When you stop forcing, you do not stop moving. You move differently. With less noise. With fewer corrections. With greater accuracy. Reality begins to meet you halfway, not because you demanded it, but because you finally made space for it. This is the paradox the mind resists: the less you push, the faster alignment stabilizes. The less you control, the more responsive the field becomes. Not because you surrendered power, but because you stopped scattering it. A breakthrough is delayed not by inaction, but by interference. When interference dissolves, movement resumes on its own. Quietly. Efficacy. Gently. Inevitably. The body is not separate from alignment. It is the instrument through which alignment is stabilized. Long before the mind understands what is happening, the nervous system is already responding to frequency. It registers safety or threat, openness or contraction, coherence or fragmentation. This response is not psychological. It is energetic. The body is a receiver, and it is always tuned to something. When the nervous system perceives safety, the signal you broadcast becomes steady. When it perceives threat, the signal fractures. This is why calm is not just a preference, it is a requirement for sustained alignment. A system in defense cannot hold a new frequency. It will revert to what is familiar, even if what is familiar is uncomfortable. Familiarity feels safer than coherence until safety is redefined internally. The field does not respond to what you want. It responds to what your system can sustain. If the body is braced, vigilant, or preparing for impact, the instruction being sent is inconsistent. The field reads that inconsistency as unreadiness. Not as punishment, but as protection. Movement slows until the signal stabilizes. Calm does not mean numb. It does not mean passive. It means regulated. It means the system is not scanning for danger in the future or replaying the past. It means attention has returned to the present moment. In that presence, frequency locks in. The signal becomes clear enough for reality to respond without distortion. This is why breakthroughs often feel anticlimactic at the level of the body. There is no rush. No spike. No surge. Just a sense of settling. Of exhale. Of neutrality. That neutrality is power. It means the nervous system is no longer resisting the new state. It means the body is saying this is safe to inhabit. The body stabilizes what the mind recognizes. Without that stabilization, insight remains theoretical. With it, insight becomes embodied. This is why forcing emotional states backfires. It bypasses the body. It creates surface-level coherence while the system underneath remains braced. The field reads the brace, not the performance. Safety is not created by controlling circumstances. It is created by internal permission. Permission to feel. Permission to pause. Permission to not know what comes next without tightening around it. When permission is present, the nervous system recalibrates. When it recalibrates, frequency holds. When frequency holds, alignment accelerates. You do not need to fix your body. You need to listen to it. Sensations of ease, warmth, openness, or quiet are not trivial. They are confirmation signals. They indicate that the system is receptive. That receptivity is what broadcasts readiness to the field. As you recognize this, notice how little effort is required to remain present when the body feels safe. Notice how clarity arises without pressure. That is the tuning happening in real time. Not through technique, but through allowance. If this understanding is landing in your system, comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Most people are trained to look ahead. To project themselves into a future moment where things finally change. Where clarity arrives, where circumstances improve, where permission is granted to feel different. This habit quietly removes power from the only place creation actually occurs. Not later. Not someday. Now. Future seeking feels logical to the mind because it creates hope. But hope is a postponement mechanism. It implies that alignment is conditional, that reality will respond once something else happens first. The field does not operate on future conditions. It responds to present signals. Always. Without exception. Creation does not happen across time. It happens through coherence. And coherence can only exist in the present moment. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Neither carries directive power. Only the state you are inhabiting now is being transmitted. Only this moment is instructing the field. This is why effort focused on future outcomes weakens alignment. It pulls attention forward, out of presence, into anticipation. Anticipation subtly communicates lack. It says something is missing now. The field reflects that assumption. Not as punishment, but as accuracy. When attention returns to the present, identity stabilizes. You are no longer trying to become someone later. You are being someone now. That being is the signal. That being is what reality synchronizes with. Identity is not a concept. It is a frequency held in real time. The present moment is not passive. It is active. It is dynamic. It is where emotion, body, and awareness converge into a single instruction. When you are fully here, without leaning forward or backward, the signal becomes clean. The field responds to clean signals with speed and precision. This is why recognition matters more than intention. Intention often lives in the future. Recognition lives now. Recognition says, this is who I am being. This is what I am available for. This is what I am no longer negotiating. The field responds to that decisiveness immediately, even if external results appear later. Creation feels instant at the level of alignment, even when expression unfolds gradually. The shift happens now. The stabilization happens now. The rest is translation. When you understand this, waiting dissolves. You are no longer waiting for permission to arrive. You are allowing coherence to deepen. The present moment is where contrast resolves. It is where emotion completes. It is where the nervous system relaxes enough to hold a new frequency. None of that can happen in a projected future. It only happens here, where sensation is real and awareness is available. You do not need to control the present moment. You need to inhabit it. Fully. Without commentary. Without expectation. In that inhabiting, effort drops away naturally. Identity consolidates. Reality adjusts. This is the quiet truth beneath all creation teachings. Nothing is being built later. Everything is being selected now. Not by words. Not by wishes. By state. When you stop reaching for the future, the present expands. And in that expansion, reality finally has something stable to work with. Contrast is not a mistake in the system. It is the system refining itself. What feels like opposition is actually precision at work. Contrast sharpens awareness by showing you, with clarity, what no longer matches your frequency. Without contrast, preference remains vague. With contrast, alignment becomes exact. The mind tends to label contrast as delay or failure. It asks why this is happening instead of noticing what is being clarified. But reality does not introduce contrast to block movement. It introduces contrast to stabilize direction. Every moment of discomfort contains information about coherence. When that information is received without resistance, contrast completes its function quickly. Contrast works by creating definition. It draws boundaries around what you are no longer available for. It reveals emotional costs that were previously tolerated. It exposes patterns that no longer feel neutral. This exposure is not meant to provoke struggle. It is meant to refine signal. Once the signal is refined, movement becomes natural. Resistance is what turns contrast into suffering. Resistance adds narrative, judgment, and urgency. It tries to escape the sensation instead of listening to it. When contrast is resisted, it repeats. Not because reality is unkind, but because the information has not yet been integrated. The field continues to present the signal until it is acknowledged. When contrast is met with presence, something different happens. The sensation is felt without interpretation. The preference becomes clear without force. The nervous system registers the boundary without tightening around it. In that moment, alignment stabilizes. You do not need to push away what you do not want. You simply stop feeding it with attention and emotion. Contrast does not ask you to choose immediately. It asks you to notice. To notice what contracts you. To notice what drains coherence. To notice what no longer fits the identity you are inhabiting now. That noticing is enough. Choice emerges naturally once clarity is established. This is why contrast often increases just before a breakthrough stabilizes. It is not a setback. It is the final refinement. The field is asking for precision, not endurance. It is offering one last opportunity to release ambiguity. When ambiguity dissolves, movement accelerates. There is no need to dramatize contrast. It does not require emotional intensity to be effective. Subtle discomfort can be just as informative as overt friction. What matters is honesty. Honest recognition without self-judgment. Honest acknowledgement without the need to act immediately. When contrast is understood as intelligent, it loses its charge. It becomes a tool rather than a threat. You stop bracing against it. You stop asking how to get rid of it. You let it do what it came to do. Clarify. Refine. Stabilize. Alignment is not built by avoiding contrast. It is built by allowing contrast to complete its message. Once that message is received, the contrast dissolves on its own. The field no longer needs to repeat it. This is how alignment becomes stable without effort. Not by forcing positivity. Not by bypassing discomfort. But by letting contrast sharpen your signal until there is confusion left for reality to reflect. There is a phase in every real transformation where the external world appears to pause. Nothing obvious moves. Circumstances look unchanged. Feedback is minimal. This is often misread as stagnation, but it is one of the most active stages of alignment. When nothing seems to be happening, everything is recalibrating. The mind expects movement to be visible. It looks for confirmation through events, results, or reactions. When those do not arrive, doubt begins to form. But the field does not reorganize in ways that are immediately observable. It restructures internally first. Foundations are adjusted before structures rise. Signal stabilizes before expression follows. This neutral gap exists because coherence is being integrated. Old patterns are loosening their grip. New frequencies are finding their baseline. This requires stillness. Not because progress has stopped, but because interference has been reduced. Movement that happens too quickly during this phase would collapse under its own instability. The neutral gap tests steadiness. It asks whether alignment is conditional or embodied. Whether trust exists without reassurance. Whether presence can be maintained without stimulation. This is not a punishment. It is a calibration. The field is observing consistency, not effort. During this phase, emotional intensity often drops. There is less urgency, less friction, less excitement. This can feel unsettling if identity was previously anchored to striving. But this flattening is not loss. It is normalization. The system is learning how to inhabit the new frequency without spike or crash. When you do not interfere with the neutral gap, it completes itself efficiently. Interference comes in the form of checking, doubting, comparing, or forcing movement. Each of these introduces noise into the signal. Noise prolongs the gap. Not because the field withholds, but because coherence has been disrupted. Steadiness is the only requirement here. Not optimism. Not positivity. Steadiness. The ability to remain present without needing something to happen. The ability to let the phase be quiet without labeling it as wrong. This steadiness tells the field that the frequency is sustainable. The paradox is that the less you demand evidence, the faster evidence can emerge. Evidence is not withheld during the neutral gap. It is being prepared. Timing is being synchronized across variables you cannot see. When those variables align, movement resumes naturally. This phase often arrives just before external shifts become undeniable. But if you rush it, you reset it. Not by failing, but by signaling unreadiness. Readiness is demonstrated through patience without waiting. Through presence without expectation. When nothing changes on the surface, something important is being completed underneath. This is where trust becomes practical. Not as belief, but as behavior. You trust by staying. By not abandoning the present moment. By not reaching for the future to escape the quiet. The neutral gap is not empty. It is dense with reorganization. When you allow it to finish, the next movement does not require effort. It arrives with a sense of inevitability. Because by then, alignment is no longer fragile. It is stable. Most people imagine timelines as things to reach, chase, or unlock in the future. They picture movement as effortful, as if reality were a distant location that must be traveled to. This assumption quietly creates strain. Timelines are not destinations. They are states. You do not arrive at them by pursuit. You access them by resonance. A timeline is a version of reality that already exists as a coherent pattern. It is not created when you want it. It is selected when your identity matches it. This is why chasing outcomes rarely works. Chasing implies separation. It signals that what you want is not available now. The field responds to that signal with accuracy. Tuning is different from chasing. Tuning is subtle. It is internal. It happens when your emotional state, nervous system, and sense of self settle into coherence. When this happens, the timeline that matches that coherence becomes the one you experience. No force is required. No leap is taken. The shift feels more like recognition than movement. Identity is the tuner. Not personality, not self-image, but the frequency you inhabit consistently. Identity is what you assume is normal for you. What you expect without effort. What you no longer question. That assumption broadcasts continuously. Timelines respond to that broadcast without negotiation. This is why visualizing without identity change produces unstable results. Visualization can momentarily access a frequency, but if identity does not stabilize it, the signal collapses. The timeline fades. Not because it was false, but because it was not sustainable. The field always prioritizes stability. When you tune into a timeline, life does not suddenly feel unfamiliar. It feels oddly normal. Opportunities arise without drama. Decisions feel obvious. Resistance decreases. This is the signature of alignment. When something is meant for your current identity, it does not require convincing. Chasing creates tension because it asks you to become someone later in order to deserve a reality now. Tuning removes that delay. It asks who you are being in this moment. That being determines which version of reality is available. Creation happens instantly at the level of selection, even if expression unfolds gradually. You do not need to understand timelines intellectually. You interact with them emotionally. When something feels aligned, expansive, and calm, you are tuned to a compatible timeline. When something feels tight, urgent, or heavy, you are not. The body registers this faster than the mind. Timelines shift when you stop negotiating with misalignment. When you no longer try to make something work that contracts you. When you allow yourself to be unavailable for what no longer fits. That refusal is not rejection. It is calibration. The field does not respond to desire alone. It responds to readiness. Readiness is demonstrated through consistency of state, not intensity of wanting. When your state stabilizes, the timeline that matches it becomes inevitable. You are not late. You are not behind. You are simply tuning. And tuning does not require effort. It requires honesty. The moment identity settles, reality follows. Not because you chased IT, but because you finally matched it. External change is never the beginning. It is the echo. What moves first is identity. Not the story you tell about yourself, not the role you perform, but the internal reference point you return to when nothing is happening. That reference point is causal. Everything else follows. Most people try to change outcomes by changing actions. They do more, plan more, adjust more. Action feels tangible. But action taken from an unstable identity produces inconsistent results. The same behavior can create expansion or resistance depending on who is doing it. Being precedes doing. Always. Identity is not a declaration. It is a state you occupy without effort. It is what feels normal to you. What you expect. What you tolerate. What you no longer question. These assumptions operate quietly, beneath conscious thought, and they are always broadcasting. Reality organizes itself around those broadcasts with precision. This is why visible change often lags behind internal shifts. Identity must stabilize before reality can mirror it consistently. If external change happened immediately, it would not hold. It would feel foreign. It would trigger contraction. The field waits until the internal state can sustain the reflection. Being is not passive. It is active at a deeper level than doing. Being determines the quality of attention, the tone of emotion, the posture of the nervous system. From that foundation, action becomes either aligned or compensatory. Aligned action flows. Compensatory action strains. When identity begins to shift, it often goes unnoticed at first. Preferences change. Tolerances narrow. Certain conversations lose appeal. Old motivations feel hollow. This is not confusion. It is reorganization. The system is recalibrating what fits the new reference point. Trying to rush external change during this phase creates friction. It asks reality to respond before coherence has settled. The result is partial movement, false starts, or temporary gains that collapse. Patience here is not delay. It is precision. You are allowing identity to consolidate. Identity stabilizes through repetition of being, not repetition of affirmation. It stabilizes when you consistently choose alignment over urgency. When you no longer override contraction for familiarity. When you stop negotiating with what no longer matches you. These choices may look small, but they are structural. Once identity stabilizes, external change becomes obvious and often effortless. Opportunities align. Decisions simplify. Resistance drops. It can feel sudden, but it is not. It is the delayed reflection of a shift that has already completed internally. This is why forcing outcomes before identity settles is exhausting. You are asking the world to confirm something you have not fully embodied. The field waits for congruence. When congruence is present, response is immediate. You do not need to announce your identity shift. You do not need to prove it. Reality does not require explanation. It only requires consistency. When who you are being stops fluctuating, what you experience stops fluctuating too. External change is not something you make happen. It is something that happens when identity no longer wavers. Stabilize the being, and the doing will take care of itself. When the field begins to respond, it rarely does so in obvious or dramatic ways. It starts subtly, through responsiveness rather than results. A conversation opens at the right moment. Information appears without effort. A delay dissolves unexpectedly. These are not coincidences. They are signs that alignment has stabilized enough for reality to move with you instead of against you. Synchronicity is not magic. It is efficiency. It occurs when resistance drops low enough that the shortest path can be taken. The field is always responsive, but responsiveness becomes visible only when the signal is clear. When identity stabilizes, emotion settles, and the nervous system is calm, the signal becomes readable. Reality responds accordingly. The mistake many people make at this stage is grasping. They see responsiveness and try to secure it. They analyze it, chase it, or attempt to replicate it. This introduces urgency back into the system. Urgency destabilizes coherence. The field responds by slowing down again, not as punishment, but as correction. Responsiveness is an invitation to trust, not a cue to control. It asks for relaxed participation. Notice the opening. Move when movement feels natural. Pause when pause feels appropriate. Do not demand continuity. Allow responsiveness to be fluid. The more you try to hold it in place, the more it slips. Synchronicity works best when it is met with neutrality. Appreciation without attachment. Recognition without interpretation. When you let a moment land and pass without needing it to mean something, you signal maturity. You show the field that you can receive without grasping. That signal deepens responsiveness. The field does not respond to excitement. It responds to stability. Excitement spikes and collapses. Stability sustains. This is why aligned responsiveness often feels understated. It fits. It does not shock. It integrates smoothly into your life. That smoothness is the indicator of true alignment. When responsiveness increases, choice becomes simpler. You do not need to weigh options heavily. One direction feels lighter. One response feels obvious. This is not intuition as a dramatic voice. It is intuition as absence of resistance. Follow that absence. It is accurate. Do not rush to define what is happening. Labels freeze movement. Let the pattern unfold without naming it prematurely. The field communicates through progression, not explanation. Each response sets up the next. Your role is to stay present and available, not to manage the sequence. If responsiveness fades temporarily, do not correct it. Nothing is wrong. Signals fluctuate as integration continues. Stay steady. Grasping delays. Allowing restores flow. The rhythm will return when coherence is maintained. The field responds when you stop testing it. When you stop asking for proof. When you remain open without expectation. That openness is not passive. It is precise. It tells reality that you are ready to receive without needing to control. This is how alignment deepens. Not by demanding signs, but by responding cleanly when they appear. Let responsiveness guide you without becoming something you chase. It is already meeting you where you are. The journey you are on is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what was never lost. Before improvement, before effort, before identity fragmentation, there was awareness. Stable. Present. Complete. This is not a destination you reach. It is a state you recognize. Self-improvement assumes deficiency. It assumes there is something wrong that needs correction. That assumption keeps identity in motion, always chasing an upgraded version of itself. Remembrance collapses that chase. It reveals that what you are seeking is the awareness doing the seeking. When remembrance begins, striving softens. Goals lose urgency. Not because life becomes empty, but because fullness is no longer conditional. You stop trying to fix yourself and start listening. In that listening, clarity emerges without effort. Consciousness does not need to be built. It needs to be acknowledged. When you acknowledge it, identity reorganizes around presence instead of performance. You are no longer trying to prove worth. You are inhabiting being. This shift can feel disorienting because effort has been familiar for so long. Effort created a sense of direction. Without it, the mind may fear stagnation. But what replaces effort is intelligence. Movement guided by coherence rather than pressure. Remembering does not remove personality or preference. It contextualizes them. You still act. You still choose. But action arises from clarity instead of compensation. Choice becomes clean. Emotion becomes informative rather than overwhelming. When consciousness is recognized as what you are, identity stops fluctuating. External circumstances lose the power to define you. This is not detachment. It is stability. You remain engaged without being entangled. The more this recognition deepens, the quieter it becomes. There is less need to explain yourself, less need to convince, less need to arrive anywhere else. Life continues, but it no longer feels like a test. It feels like expression. Remembrance is not a peak state. It is ordinary, subtle, available in simple moments. In breath, in sensation, in awareness noticing itself. This ordinariness is what makes it sustainable. You are not meant to hold a high. You are meant to rest in what is. You have not been moving toward yourself. You have been circling what was already present. The breakthrough was never about becoming more. It was about releasing the effort to be anything other than what you already are. As this lands, notice the simplicity of being here. That simplicity is not emptiness. It is completion. And from that completion, life unfolds without strain. Living from the breakthrough state is not about maintaining a feeling. It is about maintaining coherence. Peak experiences fade. Emotional highs normalize. What remains is the way you meet ordinary moments. That is where embodiment is tested and stabilized. The mind often expects a breakthrough to feel dramatic indefinitely. When intensity drops, it assumes something was lost. But intensity was never the marker. Stability is. A true breakthrough integrates into daily life quietly. It changes how you respond, not how excited you feel. Consistency of being is what allows the new state to become livable. This means returning to presence in small moments. How you move through your day. How you speak when no one is watching. How you pause instead of react. These choices do not look significant, but they are structural. They reinforce identity at a deep level. Living from alignment does not require constant awareness. It requires honest correction. When you notice contraction, you do not judge it. You listen. When you notice effort creeping in, you soften. When you notice urgency, you slow. These micro-adjustments keep the system calibrated without turning life into a practice. Peak experiences are temporary by design. They show you what is possible, then dissolve so you can embody the frequency without stimulation. If you chase the peak, you destabilize the state. If you allow ordinariness, the state deepens. This is the paradox of integration. Embodiment means letting the breakthrough inform how you relate to time. You stop rushing. You stop postponing satisfaction. You stop framing your life as a means to an end. Presence becomes sufficient. Not because ambition disappears, but because ambition no longer defines worth. The breakthrough state expresses itself as simplicity. Decisions feel cleaner. Boundaries become clearer. You do less explaining. Less proving. Less managing. Not because you withdrew, but because coherence reduced friction. Life requires fewer adjustments when alignment is stable. Consistency does not mean rigidity. It means responsiveness without volatility. You adapt without abandoning yourself. You engage without losing center. When challenges arise, you meet them without collapsing into old patterns. That steadiness is embodiment in action. Living from this state also means releasing the need to revisit the breakthrough mentally. You do not need to remind yourself what happened. You do not need to recreate the insight. You live from it. The moment you turn the breakthrough into a reference point, you move away from it. It is not behind you. It is here. This is why daily life becomes the teacher. Not through lessons, but through feedback. When something feels off, you notice sooner. When something aligns, you trust it without overthinking. Awareness becomes practical. A breakthrough that cannot be lived is not complete. Completion happens when the new frequency becomes unremarkable. When it no longer needs attention. When it simply is. That ordinariness is not delusion. It is mastery. You are not meant to stay elevated. You are meant to stay aligned. And alignment expresses itself best when life looks normal, steady, and quietly responsive. That is how the breakthrough becomes permanent. There comes a point where a phase no longer needs reinforcement. Where it stops requiring attention, effort, or validation. That point is not marked by excitement. It is marked by steadiness. Quiet certainty. A sense that nothing needs to be done to keep what has already stabilized. This is where the breakthrough becomes self-sustaining. A self-sustaining phase does not mean life becomes predictable or static. It means alignment is no longer fragile. The system has learned the frequency. The body recognizes it as safe. Identity no longer fluctuates around it. Because of this, reality no longer needs constant correction. The signal holds on its own. Completion does not feel like an ending. It feels like relief. Like setting something down without needing to name it. The absence of urgency becomes normal. You stop checking yourself. You stop monitoring progress. You stop asking if you are doing it right. These questions dissolve because the state answers them implicitly. The mind may look for a final confirmation. A moment that proves the breakthrough is real. But proof is not how this phase operates. Proof belongs to instability. Stability does not argue for itself. It simply persists. When the phase is complete, it continues without your involvement. What sustains alignment now is not vigilance, but familiarity. The frequency has become the default. You return to it naturally after distraction, without effort or frustration. That return is automatic. That is the sign of integration. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges no longer threaten identity. They are met from center instead of reaction. Responses remain proportionate. Emotion moves without hijacking direction. The field continues to respond because the signal remains consistent even when conditions vary. A self-sustaining phase also removes the need to explain yourself. You do not need language to justify your state. You do not need to convince others or yourself. Coherence speaks quietly through action, timing, and presence. That is enough. At this point, attention turns outward naturally. Not to seek, but to include. Not to prove, but to offer. The phase completes its inward cycle and begins to express itself through contribution, clarity, and availability. This is not obligation. It is overflow. You may notice that what once felt significant now feels simple. That simplicity is not loss of meaning. It is refinement. The signal has been distilled to its essence. There is nothing extra to maintain. Nothing to perform. Nothing to remember deliberately. The breakthrough does not need to be revisited. It does not need to be relived. It is no longer an event in memory. It is a state in motion. Ongoing. Adaptive. Stable. It continues because it no longer depends on attention. This is where trust becomes implicit. You trust yourself without needing to declare it. You trust the field without watching it. You trust timing without tracking it. This trust is not belief. It is the absence of doubt. The phase is complete because it no longer asks anything of you. It continues because it has become who you are being. And from this steadiness, life unfolds with less resistance and more precision than before. Share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.